Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. Well, we have it for you today, my first draft of the new FPL season. If you are new to the channel, please do like and subscribe. Also, like if you're not new, it's greatly appreciated. All the support last season was awesome. So hopefully we can continue it into this season as well. And let's get into it. So we've got my team and we're going to get it on the board here. And I'm going to start with Jordan Pickford. Now, before we get into the players, it is important for me especially to not get too hung up on your first FPL draft and overconvince yourself that the players that you get in are the players you must have at the start of the season as well. You are allowed to make changes. I think sometimes I create reasons in my head as to why the players I picked originally are better than any other options, and whether that kind of makes me prove myself correct in my head, I'm not too sure. So it is important to stay open minded. But with that in mind, I've gone with Jordan Pickford to start in goal for me at the start of the season. If you look at the clean sheets from last season, there's actually not that much widespread of players. Only seven goalkeepers got double figures last season, and none of those are under 5 million. I usually like a 4.5 million and a 4 million goalkeepers in my squad, but they're usually the lowest scoring starters as well. So sometimes you might pick the rest of your squad and then you just see what you're left with and then pick the goalkeepers from that budget that you have remaining. In terms of clean sheets, I do think they can come in bursts. Everton have good fixtures at the start of the season. So they've got Fulham, Wolves, Sheffield, Luton, and Bournemouth in the first eight. I think that maybe the Sean Dyche effect could also come into it, where he's a little bit um, more consistent in terms of the home form as well, and start a bit of tighter defences moving forward into the season. My backup goalkeeper is James Trafford from Burnley, just transferred over from Man City, ironically playing Man City at the start of the season. He won't be in my starting 11 for that. I just think he's someone that, if he's starting for Burnley, sometimes these teams that come up, they can have good runs of form, and if that starts happening, I can just swap him in and sort of match the fixtures up with Jordan Pickford. Into my defence, I've gone with Saliba to start with. In my opinion, he's the most likely Arsenal defender to keep his place. I can see Timber edging out Gabriel uh, relatively soon at the start of the season. I think he's a long-term replacement. And Zinchenko's more injury-prone to low-key injuries throughout the season. And Ben White's zero point 0.5 million more, which won't really matter. To be honest, if you've got that budget to upgrade, I think Ben White is a great option. But for me, I think Saliba is someone that, he's such a key part of Arsenal's defence. We saw it last season. Arsenal's fixtures to start out include Forest, Palace, Fulham, Everton, and Bournemouth in the first seven. All of those look great for clean sheets. I think if you've got a bit more budget, upgrade to White, but absolutely no problem if not with Saliba. Next, we've got Ruben Diaz. Now, for me, I think you need a Man City defender in. Their fixtures look absolutely fantastic at the start of the season with Burnley, Sheffield United, Fulham, West Ham, Forest, and Wolves in the first seven. Their other game is against Newcastle. So to me, that's not necessarily the biggest risk for conceding a goal as well, because at times last season, Newcastle, they were keeping clean sheets, but they weren't scoring lots. I would also say John Stones is a good option as well. Um, but he's someone that has been playing in midfield towards the end of last season, and I'm not overly convinced that that role is going to continue all the time. I think that's maybe something that was brought in on the fly last season, and it worked out well, and they stuck with it because they had the momentum. Be interested to see where he plays or whether he just stays in defence consistently. Rounding out my three-person defence, I've gone with Sven Botman. Now, 4.5 million for a defender who started 35 games for a Champions League team last season is awesome. Newcastle haven't added many players, especially in defence, so his position isn't under threat. I would be prepared to have him on your bench early on, as Newcastle open up against Villa, Man City, Liverpool, and Brighton in the first four games. Although, if he is on your bench, he's also only 4.5 million. So I think that's pretty standard, really. You've not got loads of money tied up in a player on your bench. The rest of my defenders will go through to the bench to start with, just to stay in the defence. I've gone with Tyrone Mings. Now, he's averaged over 3,000 minutes in the last four seasons, and he's also got over 10 clean sheets in each of the last three. Villa were great towards the end of last season, and I don't really see a reason why they can't continue that momentum. There's not been much changeover in terms of personnel, although they do have defenders coming back from injury. But I think Tyrone Mings was such a key part of that run towards the end of last season. He's at least going to start the season, and it could be a strong start as well. For me, I would definitely have one, if not two, Villa players. And if you have the budget, I'd be tempted for maybe Martinez in goal instead of Mings, just for that security in terms of playing time. But like I say, Mings has logged a lot of minutes over the last few seasons, and he's shown that he is a consistent player. Last defender I've got is Levi Colwill. Now, I'm not that hot on Chelsea, and I can't believe this guy is only 1.4% owned. Even just to sit on the bench at 4.5 mil if you've got a starting Chelsea centre back. Chelsea's attack is probably going to be inconsistent, but for some of the fixtures, he can definitely be rotated into the starting 11. Now, whether he starts or not is a question, but Chelsea are reluctant to sell. So I do think that there is a chance he's involved. But again, like we said with Sven Botman, you can rotate these two and Tyrone Mings. If you're starting Saliba and Ruben Diaz, you only need one of your defenders to start out of the remaining three, and they're all 4.5 million, so it's not that big a deal if they're not playing to have 4.5 million players on your bench. But onto the midfields we go, and we're going to start with Bukayo Saka. Now, I spoke about him in previous videos, and I just don't see a world where he isn't in my team at the start of the season. As we said, Arsenal's fixtures look great, and even in the first draft, I just think he is someone that I'm going to have in at the start of the season, even though I talk about being open minded. Unless there's an injury, I just think he is tremendous value. So much so on Arsenal that I've gone with Martinelli as well. Even with Trossard coming in January, Martinelli still had 34 starts last season, and I wouldn't worry about rotation until it actually happens. I think sometimes people are like, oh, what if he's rested? What if he's rotated out? Well, what if he's not and he continues scoring? I do think that there's what you kind of worth waiting and seeing. Like if he is starting to be rotated, you can just transfer him out. Like it's not a big deal. But I do think he was such a big part of Arsenal's attack last season. Champions League doesn't start for a few game weeks. I think he is the first choice, one of the first choice wingers. And I think you ride that wave until it peters out. He did outperform his expected goals of 9 by scoring 15 last season, but I also don't see why that can't happen again. My next midfielder is Diogo Jota. Now, it's maybe an interesting one off the bat, but he still got 7 goals and 4 assists last season from just 12 starts. And that's with injuries as well, which means there was a lack of momentum in his game. The season before, he actually had double the minutes and double the goals. He got 15 goals in double the minutes the season before, which shows that the attacking returns are there consistently when he's playing. He doesn't need loads of minutes to return, and he is very consistent. He is also listed as a midfielder, so the extra point for goals and clean sheets also need to be taken into account. And for me, 8 mil is a pretty bargain price. Next in midfield of my five-player midfield, I've got Brian Mbuemo. Now, he is also listed as a midfielder, and with Tony out, will surely be the main guy up front for Brentford. I think if Brentford are hoping to score, they're hoping Mbuemo's also going to be involved in that because they've got a lack of options as it stands. The flip side of this is that now other teams don't have to plan to defend for Ivan Toney. So, say last season, he'd be the main focal point of the attack and he'd take a lot of the attention of opposition defences. Now they can game plan for Mbuemo and really try and shut him down. So he's not going to have that same space that he had last season. And it'd be interesting to see how he reacts to that. But there is a chance that the goals do just dry up and Brentford really struggle in an attacking way this season. But I think it's worth a risk early on just to at least find out. Finally, rounding out the midfield, we've got Eze. He's another potential bargain. I do think he's one of these young players that's about to take another leap this season and could potentially take last season's good form towards the end into the start of this one. I think this time next year we'll be looking at Eze as an 8 million midfielder. So I think it's worth jumping on the bandwagon early on, see how it turns out. I think as well with players that finish the season strong, it's worth just seeing how they get on at the start of this season. So he is a player that I am quite hot on, and I think he's someone that you should be having in your teams, especially at that price. Up front, we're going with Haaland. Now, it's pretty obvious, really. I did talk in my last video that he could be like 16 mil, and we'd still have him in. So he is good value, I think. If you look at him and say, well, he's cheaper than what I would want to spend on him. If he was 16 mil, I still want him in, and you're offering me him at 14 mil. What a bargain! So he is someone that I think you're absolutely going to have in. Not having him in last season at the start of it cost me about 100 to 150 points to my total score. I won't be making the same mistake this time around. Last starting striker we've got up front is Ollie Watkins. He is kind of my bargain version of Kane. He's got half the goals for almost half the price, but with a lot more security with his surroundings and a manager who's had a full pre-season and a system that brought good form from Ollie Watkins at the end of last year. Europe fatigue shouldn't be a problem for months, so I do think he's somebody you should absolutely consider getting in your team. Rounding out the squad, we've got Calvert-Lewin. Now, he is an absolute risk, and together with Jota might be too much for me on the injury front for this team to withstand. But Everton's good early fixtures do make it tempting, and 6 mil isn't a bad price for someone that, if he is fit, can get lots of goals. He's done it before. The big key is obviously, can he be fit? I do still have 1.5 million in the bank, so I could upgrade to someone like Alexander Isak if it didn't work out. So my total value is 98.5 million. Potential changes for me could be Trafford to a 4 million goalkeeper, who'd likely be a non-playing goalkeeper. And then that means I could upgrade Eze or Mbuemo to Bruno Fernandes. I do quite like the look of that. Whether I decide to stick with Ruben Diaz in defence is a question as well, whether there's a cheaper defender out there, or I could upgrade him as well to one of the premium defenders like Trent, if I can cut costs, like I say, with Trafford moving out as well. So, strengths for this team, try to analyse my own judgment. All these players played in the league last season, so I think that's super valuable to have players that are used to the league, used to the Premier League, playing these games week in, week out in not great weather. None of the teams that they play for have had manager changes as well. I think that's super valuable and super underrated for Fantasy League to have these managers that are settled in and had pre-season and good form towards the end of last season, at least, if not for the whole season. Think that momentum is something definitely worth considering, and it's quite difficult to measure. You won't see it come up necessarily in the stats, those intangibles. But working with managers and systems that you're used to is obviously going to be beneficial for your team. Weaknesses, there's potential injury concerns. I do kind of have a lot of players coming off either injuries towards the end of last season or last season was disrupted with injuries and they weren't able to get consistent playing time. And that does maybe lead to quite a lot of risk. Players like Calvert-Lewin, Diogo Jota, even Ruben Diaz and Saliba were out last season. I do also think someone like Mbuemo is somebody that might need to come out early on if Brentford do not have a great start. And even someone like Colwell, whilst he's 4.5 million, if other players aren't playing as well, and I have to try and put him in the starting lineup, that does add pressure on the fact that I will need him to play. So I do think it's a pretty good first draft, quite a solid first draft if everything goes my way. But let me know what you think. Let me know any changes. Are any of these players too big a risks and you'd stay away? Got too many potential, or it'd be great if this happens. And should I get some more sort of certain starters in my team? And are there any players that you think, oh, I didn't think of him. He looks quite good. Yeah, I might be worth giving him a go. So thank you very much for listening. Like and subscribe the video. All that support is greatly appreciated. And I will see you in the next one.